May I ask you a naive question, Mr. Falco? Exactly how does a press agent work?
Tonight we're discussing Alexander Mackendrick's 1957 film, Sweet Smell of Success. This fast-moving and incredibly biting satirical noir stars Burt Lancaster as the most powerful and ruthless gossip columnist on Broadway, J.J. Hunsaker.
You think this is a personal thing with me? Are you telling me I think of this in terms of personal pique? Don't you see that today that boy wiped his feet on the choice and the predilections of 60 million men and women in the greatest country in the world? If you had any morals yourself, you'd understand the immorality of that boy's stand today.
Millions of New Yorkers read his column in the New York Globe, and he can make or break entire careers just by what he writes about, the entertainers, politicians, and stars he writes about. This gives JJ an insane amount of control over everyone around him. One bad word, one perceived slight, and your career might be gone overnight. However, there's one person JJ can't completely control. His sister Susan, played by Susan Harrison. His inability to fully dominate his sister is an unhealthy obsession that's consuming him. Susan is dating a jazz guitarist named Steve Dallas, who JJ disapproves of. He wants Susan's attention, loyalty, and gaze all to himself. And so he hires a cloying, ambitious, and pathetic press agent named Sidney Falco, played by Tony Curtis, to break them up.
Hi. Can more than two enjoy this? Where are those glossy prints you promised me? You know, I can't place them later than the night.
Thanks very much just the same. Let's forget about it, huh? Come on, Susie, it's cold out here.
Let me apologize for getting you a press spread. It's been an honor serving you gratis.
You know, Falco, I get the feeling you're always snooping around.
Usually the clients in the entertainment industry hire Sidney Falco as a press agent to convince the gossip columnists to print things about them. What he actually does is he tries to find out secrets in gossip so he can sell them as tips to the gossip columnists. A big part of Falco's business model is that he has a supposedly close friendship with J.J. Hunsaker. And his desperate attempts to get J.J. to respect and notice him lead him to take on the task of breaking up Susan and Steve Dallas.
The columnists can't do without us, except our good and great friend J.J. forgets to mention that. You see, we furnish him with items.
What, some cheap, gruesome gags?
You print them, don't you?
Yes, with your clients' names attached. That's the only reason the poor slobs pay you, to see their names in my column all over the world. Now I make it out you're doing me a favor?
I didn't say
The day I can't get along without a press agent's handouts, I'll close up shop and move to Alaska lock, stock, and barrel.
Burt Lancaster has spent his early years as a circus acrobat, and though he does no stunts here, I think you can see the way he holds his body as the megalomaniac Hunsaker that he's extremely body conscious. After serving in World War II, Lancaster had his breakthrough role in The Killers, and had a first phase of his acting career playing tough guys with a tender heart. That's the furthest thing from J.J. Hunsaker, who feels almost inhuman and machine-like. In 1956, Burt Lancaster was being recognized as an actor with more talents than he was given credit for, and he and Tony Curtis were cast together in Trapeze, about an injured and embittered acrobat who trains a younger acrobat before it turns into a rivalry and love triangle. Tony Curtis began looking at Burt Lancaster as a friend and mentor off-screen, and Burt really did train Tony to do a few stunts. Sweet Smell of Success was a transition point for Burt Lancaster, who would begin to expand his horizons and take more challenging and diverse roles throughout the 1960s. Tony Curtis, father of Jamie Lee Curtis, the husband of Janet Leigh, was a popular leading actor for his looks and charm, but was not taken seriously as someone with dramatic chops. Sweet Smell of Success could not have been more different than his previous work. In this film, he's so incredibly vile and sleazy, it oozes out of him, which made Universal Pictures refuse to allow him to break his contract to do this movie until he really fought for it. Universal spent years cultivating Tony Curtis's leading man image, and Sweet Smell of Success irreparably altered that cultivated image for years afterwards. It was literally hard to get the spell of that success off of him. J.J. Hunsaker's desire to completely dominate his sister doesn't seem to be really romantic or sexual. It seems to be a desire for complete psychological domination. On the other side, women throw themselves at Falco in a classic noir way, but he seems to only think of them in terms of what he can get from them, or how he can use sex or chemistry to further his own endless ambitions. In probably the most vile plotline of the entire film, Falco's romantic partner, Rita, played by Barbara Nichols, tells her that she's been fired from her job as a cigarette girl after the second biggest columnist after JJ, Leah Bartha, lured her back to his hotel room for a photo shoot, but instead tried to force himself on her.
He was doing a special Sunday piece on...
cigarette girls, and naturally...
You were thrilled about being interviewed. And, were you interviewed?
in his apartment.
Where was his wife?
I don't know. It's a big apartment.
Falco attempts to blackmail Leo Bartha with the information about Rita, trying to force him to run a column that would say Steve Dallas is a marijuana-smoking communist. He does get Rita's job back, but in exchange, coerces her into having sex with a different columnist in exchange for him running the Steve Dallas hit piece.
Sidney, I don't do this sort of thing.
What sort of thing?
This sort of thing.
You need him for a favor, don't you? Well, so do I. I need his column tonight. Didn't you ask me to do something about your job? Don't you have a kid in military school?
The characters have very little to like about them. Deeply self-absorbed, ruthlessly ambitious, trafficking in the most base and vulgar gossip. J.J. Hunsaker is a tyrannical monster, making and breaking lives at will. Falco wants to be like Hunsaker more than anything, even as he's kept at arm's length to not get his stink on Hunsaker. What we call toxic masculinity now permeates through this relationship from beginning to end. The columnist had a hollowed role in the pre-television days of the 20th century. Although they may have just been trafficking in unverified gossip and scandal, American readers desperately wanted to be let into the glamorous worlds of Hollywood and elite society, as well as the dark halls of politics, perhaps not as glamorous, but exerting raw power. Two dueling Hollywood columnists, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, battled for tens of millions of readers in the 1930s and 1940s, making stars out of their favorite actors and actresses, and consigning others to scandal and ruin. Luella Parsons was a prodigy of the newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, whose intense rivalry for mass circulation with Joseph Pulitzer got completely out of hand in the 1880s and 1890s. Hearst and Pulitzer's rivalry is where we get the term yellow journalism to describe sensationalist, exaggerated, and even fully invented stories that are tailored to a mass consumer audience who laps up the spectacle. The rivalry got so out of hand that it led America to invade Cuba and the Philippines and enter the Spanish-American War. Ironic considering Pulitzer's name is now associated with the prize for journalistic excellence. In an extremely sweet smell of success move, Parsons was able to make a lifelong friend and benefactor out of William Randolph Hearst by using her column to continually praise Hearst's mistress, Marion Davies. Marion Davies was being laughed out of Hollywood, as everyone knew Hearst was paying her way through her acting career and financing all of her films. Parsons was hired by Hearst, and her career as a gossip columnist took off. Hedda Hopper was a former actress who had been one of Parsons' many informants in Hollywood until she was offered her own gossip column, and a rivalry was born. Both Parsons and Hopper were reactionary right-wing conservatives by 1940, and when HUAC began, they became fervent supporters of McCarthyism and the blacklist.
Your friend, Hunsaker. You tell him for me he's a disgrace to his profession. Never mind about my bilious private life. I run a decent, responsible column. That's the way it stays. Your men print anything.
Sweet Smell of Success was adapted from a story in Cosmopolitan by Ernest Lehman that he wrote in 1950. Tell Me About It Tomorrow was inspired by Lehman's time working as an assistant to the famous press agent Irving Hoffman in Manhattan during the Depression. Irving Hoffman was a Broadway publicist, had a column in The Hollywood Reporter, and used his influence to promote his clients. He became enraged by Lehman's story and wouldn't talk to him for a year and a half, but eventually he relented and told Ernest that he thought he'd be a good screenwriter. And eventually Hoffman wrote a whole column about his former employee's talent as a writer and potential as a screenwriter, which got Ernest offers to become a screenwriter. Hoffman was also friends with the famed Emperor of Gossip, Walter Winchell, America's most famous gossip columnist, far surpassing even Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. When Ernest Lehman wrote Tell Me About It Tomorrow, it was not his former boss Hoffman, but Winchell that he based the J.J. Hunsaker character on. Winchell was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants in East Harlem who entered show business, going onto the vaudeville circuit for a decade. In 1920, the vaudeville tycoon E.F. Albee started a trade publication called the Vaudeville News for actors and managers on the vaudeville circuit. Winchell got hired to work at the paper with no experience and realized he loved it. He wrote about the entertainment industry, using his contacts that he built over the decade, and hopping first over to the Evening Graphic and getting hired by Hearst to work at the New York Daily Mirror. Hearst is the owner of the massive chain of newspapers by this point, made Winchell the first syndicated gossip columnist. He brought an entertainer's sense to the venture, expanding into radio and creating Winchell's Code, or Winchelisms, his own slang that was copied by other gossip columnists. During Prohibition, Winchell's circle began to include a lot of criminals, which at some point became way too seedy and began getting paranoid and feared being murdered. So Winchell fled to California, contacted J. Edgar Hoover, and gave up many of his friends in the underworld, including Louis Lepke of Murder, Inc. Winchell was on a social crusade from then on, becoming overtly political, rallying against Hitler and supporting FDR. As Winchell became more and more powerful, many believe too powerful, he got increasingly vindictive, using his gossip column and radio show to destroy critics and enemies. And then the Cold War began, and Winchell went from being a liberal New Dealer to a reactionary McCarthyite, railing against communism and calling his enemies communists, using the climate as a way to destroy them.
Because that's another part of a press agent's life. They dig up scandal about prominent people and shovel it thin among columnists who give them space.
Okay, back to Sweet Smell of Success. United Artists and Burt Lancaster's Height Hill Lancaster Company bought the rights, and Burt Lancaster offered to let Lehman direct it. But United Artists wanted a more experienced director, so James Hill went searching and decided on Alexander Mackendrick, who had just made The Lady Killers. Although he was American by birth, he had moved to Scotland as a kid, and this would be his first American film. Then Lehman got really sick and had to back out for finishing the screenplay. James Hill took over Lehman's role and wanted Paddy Chayefsky to finish the screenplay. But Alexander Mackendrick pushed to hire Clifford Odets. Odets was once a deeply heroic figure on the American left. He was a founding member of the group theater and studied acting under Lee Strasberg. During the Great Depression, he decided to try his hand as a method-trained playwright, and his plays about capitalism, exploitation, and socialism turned him into the group theater's most famous playwright. Odets tried to write in the language of the streets. Arthur Miller wrote, "For the first time, language itself marked a playwright as unique." Trying to fund his group theater production of Paradise Lost, Odets reluctantly took a Hollywood gig. Although it was lucrative to write films on contract in the studio system, critics claimed he lost that sting, that Clifford Odets feeling.
Let's make it a Dane plot. Keep it simple. We don't got to tackle the world the first time out. The important thing is we all wanted to have that Barton Fink feeling. I mean, I guess we all have that Barton Fink feeling. But since you're Barton Fink, I'm assuming you have it in spades.
Yes, the Coen brothers based Barton Fink on Clifford Odets. He was not that successful in Hollywood, but it allowed him to subsidize his plays. He wrote drafts for It's a Wonderful Life and Rhapsody in Blue, but Hollywood would ultimately ruin his career, as his political activity got him called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, along with his friend Elia Kazan. Odets and Kazan made a pact to name each other, and unlike Kazan, who decided to fully cooperate with HUAC, Odets did just enough by only naming people who had already been named by others to make everybody angry. To the left, just appearing in front of HUAC, answering questions made you a rat. Meanwhile, HUAC wanted everyone they called in front of them to give them new names. He was accosted in New York City, shunned by everyone, and his reputation as a left-wing hero was gone. But Mackendrick wanted him to finish the screenplay. Expecting a short turnaround, Odets ended up taking 4 months, dismantling every sentence, and reforming all the relationships between the characters. It would be the most popular film by far that Clifford Odets ever worked on as a screenwriter. It would not be the most popular film his co-writer Lehman ever worked on. Launching a crazy career from this, he'd go on to adapt Sound of Music, West Side Story, The King and I, North by Northwest, Family Plot, and Billy Wilder's Sabrina, as well as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Except if you'll excuse me, JJ, I'm not in jail.
You're in jail, Sidney. You're a prisoner of your own fears, your own greed and ambition. You're in jail.
You're blind, Mr. Magoo.